Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today with our webinar with AudioEye, Key Challenges in Providing Digital Accessibility to Your Clients. My name is Dara. I am the social media coordinator for Locology, and I will be your host for today's event. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with the presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A sessions at the end. You can, however, ask questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. Our speaker today is Ty Demore from AudioEye. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass this over to Ty to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending today and joining and learning a little bit about digital accessibility. We're going to talk today on the key challenges in providing digital accessibility to your clients. Often, we get a lot of questions of, hey, I build websites, or I have a user base of clients, and I'm getting a lot of questions around digital accessibility nowadays. So that's what we're really going to be focusing on today. If you have questions, feel free to write them down or put them in the chat and so forth, and we can go over them at the end. And again, I just really appreciate the opportunity and the time to go through this today. So we're gonna, just talk a little bit on what we'll cover, defining digital accessibility. A lot of times when talking around digital accessibility, there's a lot of things that can be thrown out, right? What is digital accessibility and how does it help people with disabilities access the web? Key challenges to digital accessibility. Often, too many times we get clients that come to us and say, wow, this is going to take so much work. This is going to be so hard for us to do and so hard for us to deliver. But we'll talk about what will be hard, but then also what will be solvable and how to really get to where you need to be on making your sites accessible and your digital experiences accessible for people with disabilities. Analyzing your client's risk is something else that we'll talk. Lawsuits are big in our industry. People get sued all the time for not having a digital accessible website. And we'll talk a little bit about the client's risks that are there when they don't have an accessible site, and what kind of different risks are there? Is there a large risk for someone that maybe has an e-commerce website versus someone that maybe just has a brochure site and so forth? And then what is the right solution? There's a lot of ways to tackle digital accessibility. Even at AudioEye, we have multiple ways that our clients can tackle this. We'll talk about what is the right solution and how does that right solution then ladder up to analyzing your risk and making sure that you're defining those key challenges as well. So first and foremost, defining digital accessibility. Digital accessibility in a nutshell is making sure that people with disabilities have access to the web. So think of it as a brick and mortar building. If I was to come to a site or to a bank today, or to Target, or to anywhere that has a physical brick and mortar building, there would be certain things that are built in there to make sure that people with disabilities have access, right? Ramps and rails. There would be braille on a bathroom. There would be sliding doors if I'm walking into Target. But as we continue to move into this digital environment, we have to make sure that those digital experiences are accessible for people with disabilities. So let's think of it as, maybe I have a visual disability, maybe I'm blind. Is there a certain way that that website can be read to me? Because think about it, if that website can be read to me, if that website is accessible, then what are the independence that I'm going to have to be able to access and navigate? It's going to create this amazing opportunity for me. So you have to make sure that people are not excluded from using something on the basis of experiencing their disability. And that's a very important thing. I like to always think of it as the ramps and the rails of the digital world. If it's a brick and mortar building, can someone go online and buy it? If it's an online store, I want to make sure that people with disabilities have access to that online store. Can they buy it? So when we talk about the population size here, I think a lot of people are very interested in this because of it is 1 in 4 people live with a disability worldwide. That's 1.8 billion individuals that live with some form of disability. And we'll talk a little bit as well about, the different types of disabilities. But I also like to focus in, if there's 1.8 billion people in the world that have some sort of disability that's going to alter the way that they interact with digital technology, that equals and equates to $13 trillion combined annual income for people with disabilities, their friends, and their family. We also look at this as the number of people who will be 60 and older double to 2 billion worldwide by 2050. Individuals in the aging population really can benefit from making experiences online accessible. That is something that we're focusing, doing a lot of research here at AudioEye, is how to not only make sites accessible for people with disabilities, but how to make things more simple to use, how to make things inclusive to everybody. Another stat on this that I talk a lot about is that 75% of people with disabilities use computers regularly. What that really shows me is that their $13 trillion in annual income for people with disabilities, friends and their families, are going to unlock by that 75% of people with disabilities that use their computers regularly. And 2 out of 3 of people with disabilities rely on accessibility tools and assistive technology. So when you really start to look at these statistics, not only is there a huge population to serve the information and what the web gives us independence to do, but there's also a lot of spending power there on the accessibility by the numbers globally. So when we talk about disability as well, we often in the digital space focus in on visual impairments, right? Someone that is blind, someone that's low vision, but disability has a lot of different ways to categorize. In particular, for individuals with disabilities that we service, you could have someone that has a cognitive disability, you could have someone that has a physical disability, or someone that maybe has ADHD as a disability as well. So many different types of disabilities that are going to alter the way that they interact with the website. One that I always bring up is if I have epilepsy and you have flashing content on a rotating carousel, that could alter the way that I consume, because it could be too much flashing content that ultimately sends me into a seizure. Another thing that people don't often think about is that we have 3 different categories. We have a permanent disability, a temporary disability, and a situational disability. A permanent disability would be something like I am blind, right? I am blind, I don't have my vision, therefore that's a permanent disability that I'm going to live with. A temporary disability would be something like, hey, I have an arm injury. Let's think of it from a standpoint of, hey, I broke my left arm. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to use my left arm. Therefore, the digital experience, I hope, can have a better experience for just navigating with a keyboard rather than having to navigate utilizing 2 hands or so forth, right? So temporary is something that happens. It's going to take you some time before you're going to be back from that. And then the next is situational. Let's think about someone that is maybe a new parent, right? And they're holding the baby in their right hand, right? That at that point, they're not going to be able to utilize their other hands. So that is something that is situational in what you're doing and not being able to give you that opportunity. So when we think about these permanent, temporary, and situational type of disabilities, there's different ways that not only making sites accessible are going to be great for people that have a permanent disability, but making sites accessible are going to ultimately create a better user experience for everyone as well. I see so many times that now we're building in functions into a car because someone that is driving is getting something read to them. That technology and the baseline of that technology comes from a screen reader of someone that's blind, right? So they play off each other, and there's so much that we can do that create a better user experience for everyone on a site by looking at the usability and the accessibility of a site. So now that we talked about what digital accessibility is and really the population size, let's talk about some key challenges and really how do you do this? How do you make sites accessible? So the first one that we're going to go into is the legal landscape of this, right? So one of the key challenges of making a site accessible is that you have a legal landscape that makes sure that websites are accessible to the ADA. So the ADA was enacted in 1990. And what the ADA states is that, public places of accommodation have to be accessible for people with disabilities. So when making your sites accessible, one of the key challenges is how do you make that accessible for that client, right? How do you make it accessible so that they don't get hit with an ADA lawsuit? What we're seeing is a 400% increase in these ADA related lawsuits between 2017 and 2021 that are stating that these websites are not meeting the requirements of being a public place of accommodation. Therefore, they have to be accessible for people with disabilities. And since they're not accessible, they're getting hit with these lawsuits that can be $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. So making sure that your clients are protected, making sure that they're not getting hit with these ADA lawsuits is extremely important, especially with the way that we're seeing the rise of these ADA lawsuits, coming up. And also we're seeing a lot of DOJ activity as well. Just recently, under Title III of the ADA, they're going to make a statement stating that websites are accessible, need to be accessible for people with disabilities. Number two is the lack of transparency. The misleading discourse and false promises made by some of the vendors in our space can make it difficult for businesses to understand the difference between a simple overlay solution and a solution that blends automation with expert human intervention. I think not only does this hold true for accessibility and making your sites accessible, but this holds true when buying any type of software. You want to make sure that you're not just buying something that is throwing a band-aid on it, right? You want to make sure that the transparency in what you are delivering is making and solving the problem. And that's especially important when you're dealing with individuals with disabilities and you're dealing with laws and regulations. We as an industry have to do better about the transparency of our products, and really focusing in on how and what we fix and how we fix it. That is something that we at AudioEye take extremely seriously. We make sure that everything that we fix, everything that we do is transparent. We make sure that you can see it, and we make sure that you know what we don't fix so that you know what you need to go in and fix yourself. And that can be a key challenge in digital accessibility, because sometimes you just go and buy a software that states, hey, this could fix the problem, but in reality, you don't actually solve the issue, which can ultimately lead to your clients having more issues when they thought that they were covered. And that is something that we as an industry are focusing heavily on to make sure that clients are protected. The third key challenge in just digital accessibility is the technology limits. In our space, automation can take care of many common accessibility errors. It makes a big difference for the scalability. We actually published a white paper here at AudioEye around this, and it's specifically around how technology is evolving and how we're going to have to do that to make sure that we solve the millions and millions of websites for the web. But it doesn't solve 100% of all errors yet. There are still a big subset of errors that do need to be fixed with manual intervention. We at AudioEye utilize a lot of templates and manual intervention for our sites that we can then try to go scale in the future and utilizing those findings. But I like to say, to think of this a lot like Siri, right? When Siri came out, it could only pick up 10% maybe of what you're saying. As more and more and more people started to utilize it and it got more data, the more it could start to automate. It's the same thing that we're doing here at AudioEye in the accessibility industry, is that we are utilizing as much as we can on automation. And the more data that we get, the more sites that we get on, the more that accessibility gets adopted as a main practice and not a byproduct practice. We will continue to get that data, and we will continue to be able to feed that to create more technology. Ultimately, it is our goal to make it so that technology can solve 99% of the problems one day. But right now we're not there. And right now we need to utilize those human interactions and those human in the loop type of solves to make sure that we are going back to key challenge number 2, making the solve with transparency. The next is the web is a dynamic place. I think anyone that is delivering web accessibility to their clients and is an agency and so forth knows that accessibility isn't something that you can just do once and set it and forget it. And also a website isn't something that you can do once and set it and forget it. You have all different types of dynamic content that gets added to these sites nowadays. If you're working with a dealership site, you might have a third-party chat widget. You might have a third-party loan system integrated into the site, and you also might have some forms, some gravity forms and video content and so forth. But really that dynamic space makes it harder, right? Because that dynamic space, the more that you put into the web, the more opportunity it has to break accessibility. And this is really something that we focus on a lot with our agencies that we partner with. Is you have to have a solution that can contain, to maintain, and to monitor where your accessibility journey is, and to continue to deliver. If you are dealing with a legal demand letter, one of the first things that they're going to talk about in their settlement agreement is that you have to have a continuous plan to solving digital accessibility. And that's really what we focus on, is creating a plan that not only once, but over a life cycle can make sure that your site is going to continuously be accessible, that this continuous dynamic space of adding new content all the time is going to be accessible. So, that is something that is a key challenge for everyone. One thing that I would also say is that if you're working with any vendors, right? Let's say that you partner with a vendor that delivers you a gravity form, or let's say that you partner with a vendor that offers you something that you're going to put in a chat widget, so forth. Make sure that that vendor commits to accessibility for you. Make sure that you have them sign something that states, hey, we will be accessible, and we will have accessible sites, or products that we integrate into your sites. Next up, analyzing your client's risk. This is something that we've started to adopt here at AudioEye, because understanding where your risk is the first thing in understanding what to deliver to your clients. If I have a client that is an e-commerce client and has a pathway to purchase, that's a high risk client. I need to make sure that not only am I providing an accessibility solution for them, but I'm making sure I'm doing manual intervention. I'm making sure that I'm doing ongoing testing with manual users, because I want to make sure that that user with a disability has the same type of opportunity that an individual that isn't using an assistive technology does when coming to the site. So understanding that client's risk is something that we want to do. So the first few things are some questions that we ask. Can I be sued, right? Any website can be sued for digital accessibility. How likely am I to be sued? What can I do to avoid litigation? What happens if I'm sued? What is effective response to litigation? These are all questions that a lot of the answers will be the same. But when you look at someone like a dealership website or a local bank or an online e-commerce, might be a little bit different than your local plumber that has 100 views on a website in a month, right? So understanding that client's risk. But the one thing I will say, that when we talk to a lot of our agencies that implement this strategy, is they all start with saying, hey, accessibility is a foundation, and there is a starting point, and then everyone works from there. This isn't something that says, no, I'm not at risk, I don't need to do it. It is a, yes, I'm at a baseline, and the baseline could be utilizing some type of automation only service and then building services on top of it. But there's always a baseline, and the baseline doesn't stop at, no, I'm not going to deliver accessible content on my website. It's just really, how much am I going to add, and how much should I be testing and continuously testing on an ongoing basis to make sure that I meet the requirements that I need to meet. Another thing that we look at in understanding your risk is your regions. What vertical am I in? What's my annual revenue size? What's my location and state? And what's my audience? I'll start with location and state and kind of work backwards on this one. In California, we have the ONRU Act. The ONRU Act states that all businesses need to be accessible, and there's a daily fine that can be associated with that ONRU Act. So being in California, it is not a, hey, you have to be accessible to the ADA. It is something that is mandated and you need to do. So that brings your risk profile high. Also, understanding the vertical space that I'm in is very important. We see a lot of activity in dealerships, a lot of activity in banking and finance, and then annual revenue and size and audience. I mean, think of this, in any other kind of risk-based profile that you have. The more revenue you have, the higher risk you have. The bigger your audience reach is, the higher risk that you have. And we really take those into effect with our clients as we go through this. The next is website functionality, and understanding that for your clients. A big statistic here is over 70% of lawsuits were filed against e-commerce businesses. So those ADA lawsuits that we talked about, making sure that your site is accessible under Title III of the ADA, over 70% of those are actually filed on e-commerce businesses that are providing something online. That is because an individual with a disability feels, and it is, that they should have the same type of pathway purchase that anyone else does online to those organizations that are delivering their services online. The other thing that we look at is what is the traffic of the site. Am I seeing hundreds of thousands of views? Because if we go back to the statistics, 1 in every 4 people lives with a disability. And if I'm having hundreds of thousands of views, I'm having a lot of individuals with disabilities come and hit my sites with the statistics. And if I'm only having 75% of them being able to access my digital content, that brings my risk profile higher. Also, what type of media am I providing? Am I providing something that is extremely important from a knowledge base, right? Am I a school? Am I a news outlet? So forth. That's very important as well, because if I'm a news outlet and I have a lot of important news that I'm trying to get out there, I need to make sure that I'm not delivering just to 75% of the population. I need to make sure that I'm delivering to 100% of that population. And ultimately, the user experience, this goes a little bit on website functionality of risk, but just overall, it becomes better for those temporary and situational disabilities as well. Because if I can make sure that my sites are accessible for people with disabilities and that they meet the requirements for the lawsuit, I can also make sure that my sites are accessible for individuals that are dealing with this from a temporary or situational disability perspective. Understanding the litigation trends and DOJ announcement is also something on risks that we look at, right? People with disabilities deserve to have an equal opportunity to access the services, goods, and programs included when offering or communicated through websites. That is from the Civil Rights Division. And really, this shows that there are verticals that they do focus on, but also the DOJ is going to make an announcement. Clients are going to be mandated, so it's very important to get ahead of this instead of being reactive with your clients to making sure that they do have accessibility and that it will be done. So we're going to move into solutions, right? A lot of times talking about risk and talking about how to solve this is not the fun part. I want to talk about how do we solve this as a solution? How do we get this right? So there's different solutions for accessibility. The first that we'll talk about is widgets and toolbars, which is really focused in on personalization settings, very affordable solutions, and then technology first, and then consultants. And we'll kind of show off how this is. Widgets and toolbars are things that just go on websites. I'm sure you've seen them. We actually provide a toolbar here at AudioEye. They're lightweight personalization tools that provide limited website adjustments. So I can change my color contrast, I can change my font size, I can change the way that I'm reading a site. Maybe I highlight certain sections. Those actually don't solve digital accessibility. They don't solve how sites are accessible for people with disabilities. What they do is just provide an alternative personalization setting for individuals on a site. The next is consultants, or the next is technology first. But before talking about technology first, we're going to talk about consultants. On the opposite spectrum are consultants, and consultants are manual audit solutions providing detailed reports and fix at source guidance. So this is the traditional way to solve digital accessibility, is that I will scan your site and then I'm going to provide you a report and tell you to go change everything at the source code. The problem with consultants that we see, and we do a lot of consulting at AudioEye, so this is even talking about ourselves, is that manual audit solutions provide a lot of work for everybody, and they're very, very expensive. An audit could start at $20,000 to $25,000. And when you talk about your clients, if you're delivering to hundreds and thousands of clients, that doesn't scale well. You're not able to actually give the solution out there to them because they're not going to be able to afford it. So what we believe at AudioEye is a technology first approach. We take as much automation and technology as we can, and we blend it with manual intervention to solve this for our clients. And how we do this is by utilizing that automation to guide us, and then bringing in human intervention to validate the fixes that we are doing and the fixes that need to be applied to the site. So with that, I'll talk a little bit more about just the AudioEye solution. If you want on the questions, I can talk a little bit more about the different types. and so forth. But I really want to open it up. I know that we have about 15 to 30 minutes on questions. I think Q&A will really help us here. I want to open it up for any questions and just, thank you again. I know we spent a lot of time talking around the risk, but when you talk about clients and you talk about delivering a solution for accessibility, I think it's very important that you talk about the risk analysis. So with that, just opening it up for questions.
Awesome, Ty. Thank you so much. I've got a couple questions here to ask you. So you've shown us the different types of solutions. How are you different from other software solutions out there?
Absolutely. So the difference in AudioEye is that we blend and have human intervention into our process, right? So we might add a technology that delivers only automation at the time, but from what we can see from automation, we fix, and what we can't see from automation, we flag as a potential problem, and we utilize human intervention to actually go in there and solve those issues line by line. So I would say that's the biggest difference between AudioEye and others in the space, is that we provide that human intervention to the client.
Okay, great. What WCAG standards should we use to test for accessibility?
That's a great question as well. We are currently on the 2.1 standards, 2.1 AA. The way that standards work is it's A, AA, and AAA. AAA being the highest, but really the gold standard and where you want to be to make sure that your site's usable and accessible for people with disabilities is in the AA standard. So that's really where you want to focus your time and efforts at. So it is the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 AA standard is really where you want to focus.
Okay, great. And I've got one more question here for you. Does having a solution in place prevent you from being sued?
That's a great question. Again, awesome questions today. So anyone can be sued for anything here in the US, right? It does not prevent you from being sued, but what it does is it gives you the ultimate mitigation and risk standpoint in leverage power, right? So just because I have AudioEye, just because I think I made my site accessible or worked with a consultant doesn't mean, hey, I have a gold shield, I can never be sued again. It's just like having insurance, right? I get in a car accident, I have insurance, I can get, I can still get sued, but I'm going to have leverage power. And what we do by providing leverage power is that we provide you all the data and the analytics of what you've done to make your site accessible and how you've done it and when you've done it, to go back to the plaintiff and say, hi, plaintiff, thank you so much for your concerns, but we are accessible and here's all the data that we have to prove it. So yes, you can still get sued. Yes, anyone can sue anyone. But when utilizing a partner like AudioEye, we can actually go in there and give you that leverage power and the data and the analytics that you need to then solve that problem, and be able to show that in the legal court case.
Okay, great. I think that wraps up our questions for today. Thank you so much, Ty and the AudioEye team. Great questions, great discussion. Thank you so much for putting together this webinar for us. It was very, very insightful and super important, especially with how digital the world is really getting these days. A few more items from Locology before we end today's webinar. You will be able to view today's broadcast along with previous webinars on our website, locology.com. Just navigate to research and resources and then webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to visit locology.com and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. And one last thing, there is still time to register for our PLACE conference next week, September 13th through 14th in New York City at Yext headquarters. You can see more information about the event on locology.com by navigating to events and then PLACE 2022. Thank you so much again and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks all.